Good morning. This hearing will come to order, and we'll see as members will be coming in as we get going. Okay, we've heard time and time again that small business contractors are good for the government and good for the economy. They are innovators, job creators, increase competition, and save taxpayer dollars in the process. That's why there's a statutory goal of awarding at least 23% of prime contract dollars to small businesses. Given their importance, we need to ensure that they have every opportunity to compete. Today, we are here to talk about a critically important advocate for small contractors within our federal procurement ecosystem. The Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization, or OSDBUs, operate on the front lines of government procurement, acting as a protector and champion of small businesses within the federal contracting space. These offices are charged with the implementation and execution of contracting assistance-related functions and duties, specifically fighting against unjustified contract bundling. In order to protect and preserve the interests of small businesses across the federal government, each agency with procurement powers has its own OSDBU office. Thus, it is important to access whether these offices are faithfully executing the responsibilities given to them. The GAO conducted a comprehensive audit of 24 federal OSDBUs, assessing their compliance with the requirement laid out in Section 15K of the Small Business Act. While the report indicated widespread and varying degrees of noncompliance, some of GAO's results are particularly troubling. GAO found several agencies were not complying with specific functional requirements in the Small Business Act. We will explore those in more detail today. Furthermore, OSDBU directors are continuing to report to persons other than the head or deputy head of the agency, and some directors are holding collateral duties. Each of the Section 15K requirements serve a unique and essential function. Any noncompliance may impede the OSDBU's ability to effectively advocate for small contractors. With that said, agencies responding to GAO's findings in various ways. Many agreed, stating that they would begin complying with the Section 15K requirements. However, some disagreed and argued that, due to the nature of the requirement and the office, that particular requirements are unsuitable for them. Some further argued that the internal structure of the agency poses barriers to compliance and that noncompliance can be attributed to the agency seeking efficiencies among its programs and offices. Agencies should not be allowed to flout the law. It is our responsibility to conduct proper oversight by asking them to explain why they are non-compliant and explore options to remedy the situation. However, I also understand each agency has its own set of challenges, particularly OSDBUs in some of the smaller ones. I hope to gain a deeper understanding today of what these challenges might be. And lastly, it is important for us to examine the Small Business Procurement Advisory Council, or SBPAC. Led by the SBA and comprised of OSDBU directors, SBPAC undertakes annual reviews of OSDBU's compliance with its statutory requirements. Discrepancies were found between GAO and SBPAC's review. This is troubling since SBPAC's reviews influence SBA's small business scorecard grades for each agency. Inaccurate SBPAC reviews may ultimately impede Congress's ability to conduct effective oversight over agency OSDBUs. Understanding this, we should explore ways in which the SBPAC review process can be improved and what additional controls can be put in place to ensure objectivity and fairness in its future reviews. Now, if you've understood all that, great. We're halfway there. Ultimately, the lessons we take from examining today's GAO report will help us understand how OSDBUs impact small contractors nationwide. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses. We will benefit from your perspective, and I thank you for being here today. I now yield the Ranking Member, Ms. Murphy, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Each year, the federal government procures more than $400 billion in goods and services from businesses around the country through government contracts. The Small Business Act established a government-wide goal of awarding at least 23% of prime federal contracts to small businesses to ensure that they receive their fair share of federal contracting opportunities. Additionally, Offices of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization, or OSDBUs, were created at every federal agency to increase small business participation in the federal procurement marketplace. OSDBUs promote small business inclusion within an individual agency's mandate and ensure that small firms are treated fairly and equitably in the contracting process. In this capacity, OSDBUs serve as one of the primary advocates for small firms and offer them information and guidance on contracting opportunities, both for prime contract awards and subcontract awards. Additionally, they work with the SBA and other agency officials to determine contracting goals for their agency. Overall, OSDBUs serve a critical role in the procurement process because they're well positioned to help small businesses compete more successfully for federal government contracts. To ensure that these offices are fulfilling their mission, the GAO has reviewed each agency's compliance with their statutorily mandated functions. This hearing will address the most recent report on efforts to encourage agencies to voluntarily comply with reporting structure requirements for the OSDBU director. The GAO concluded that several agencies failed to comply with the statute in a variety of ways, which may have interfered with their ability to fully advocate for small businesses as Congress had intended. Findings like these leave us all concerned about the lack of assistance for small contractors, many of whom rely on OSDBUs. With the recent growth in federal contract spending, small firms should be receiving opportunities commensurate with this increase. However, the dollars and actions awarded to small businesses have been somewhat stagnant since fiscal year 2005. Moreover, small business contracting programs are vastly underutilized as only 25% of these actions were awarded through a small business set-aside or sole source contract. Pursuant to statutory requirements, OSDBUs must work with small businesses to ensure that they receive the maximum practicable opportunity to compete for contracts. This committee shares that priority and therefore must hold OSDBUs who do not meet these statutory requirements accountable for their shortcomings. Today's hearing will provide background and ideas needed to guide the committee as we draft legislation to address this problem. I thank the witnesses for being here and look forward to gaining more insight as to how we can make OSDBUs more effective in meeting their mission. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. And if committee members have an opening statement prepared, I ask that they be submitted for the record. Okay, I'm going to take a minute to explain the timing. Mr. Shearer and Mr. Wong know exactly what I'm going to say. You got 5 minutes. The lights will come on when it goes to yellow. You have a minute, and then just start wrapping it up when it gets to red, and then we'll keep this thing moving. Okay, I would now like to introduce our witnesses. Our first witness is no stranger to us. It's Mr. William Shearer, Director of Financial Markets and Community Investment Team at the GAO. Mr. Shearer has testified before this committee on a number of occasions and being engaged with this committee on a wide range of small business topics. We, again, look forward to Mr. Shearer and hearing his perspective on finding this important GAO report, and we welcome you back today. It's always good to see you. Our second witness today is Mr. Rob Wong. Mr. Wong serves as the Associate Administrator for the U.S. Small Business Administration Office of Government Contracting and Business Development. He is responsible for advocating for small businesses in the federal marketplace and oversees more than $500 billion in total federal spending. This will be Mr. Wong's second time testifying before this subcommittee, and we are very happy that he has come back, and we look forward to your statements. Our third witness today is a newcomer, so we'll break you in easy. Mr. Kevin Boshears. Mr. Boshears serves as the Director of the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization and has served in the position since May of 2003. Prior to that, he served as the Director of Treasury Department OSDBU and worked as a procurement analyst providing guidance to small business specialists located in Treasury's 12 bureaus. Mr. Boshears has enjoyed a long and respectable career as an instructor, teacher, and dedicated public servant in the small business procurement arena. Needless to say, he brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table. We welcome you to the subcommittee, and we look forward to your statements today. Mr. Shearer, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Knight, Ranking Member Murphy, and members of the subcommittee. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss our recent work on the Offices of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization, often called OSDBUs. The federal government has a long-standing policy to maximize contracting opportunities for small businesses. To help increase small business visibility among federal agencies, in 1978, Congress amended the Small Business Act to require that all federal agencies with procurement powers establish an OSDBU to advocate for small businesses. Section 15K of the Small Business Act contains provisions related to OSDBUs. We recently completed a report containing findings from an extensive compliance audit where we examined 15K requirements at 24 agencies. In addition, we examined the review by the Small Business Procurement Advisory Council, called the SBPAC, of OSDBU compliance with Section 15K requirements. This statement is based on our recent report. With respect to our examination of compliance, demonstrated compliance with selected Section 15K requirements for the OSDBU varied across the 24 agencies surveyed. Examples of GAO findings include the following. 5 agencies did not demonstrate compliance with the requirement to limit collateral duties of OSDBU directors. 6 agencies did not demonstrate compliance with the requirement for compensation and seniority of OSDBU directors. Nearly all agencies, 23 to be specific, demonstrated compliance for 4 requirements: on OSDBU director experience, supervisory duties of the OSDBU director, identifying and addressing significant bundling of contracts, and providing assistance on payments. 15 agencies demonstrated compliance with the requirement to respond to notification by a small business that a solicitation unduly restricts the ability of the small business to compete for the award. For the one requirement for which we reviewed only 10 agencies, 4 OSDBU directors did not report directly to the agency head or deputy head. SBA chairs SBPAC, and its members are nearly all OSDBU directors. With respect to our examination of the SBPAC's annual peer review, we found that SBA's assessment of compliance differed from ours. Specifically, when we considered the same Section 15K requirements as the SBPAC review, our compliance determinations did not align with SBPAC's 2016 Organizational Success Factor scores. Other than reviewing documentation agencies choose to provide, SBA's guidance for the review panel does not indicate any other means by which reviewers could obtain or clarify information about agencies' compliance with Section 15K requirements. We recognize that neither the SBPAC nor any other entity, including ourselves, can conduct this type of compliance audit that we have just completed. However, we do think that the SBPAC should consider our findings as it continues to work on a more in-depth review process. For the 19 of 24 agencies that did not demonstrate compliance with Section 15K requirements, we recommended that they comply or report to Congress on why they had not complied, including seeking any statutory flexibilities or exceptions believed appropriate. We made one recommendation to SBA to include more detailed guidance to SBPAC members for the annual reviews. Chairman Knight, Ranking Member Murphy, and members of the subcommittee, this concludes my statement. I'd be pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Shearer. And Mr. Wong, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Knight. Thank you, Ranking Member Murphy. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today, particularly alongside Mr. Bill Shearer from GAO and my colleague Kevin Boshears of DHS. SBA is fortunate to have a good and constructive relationship with both of them. In my role as SBA Associate Administrator for SBA's Office of Government Contracts and Business Development, I also chair the SBPAC, which works collaboratively with the OSDBUs to achieve the government-wide small business goals. I hope to bring a fresh set of eyes and perspective. When I reviewed the GAO report, I made several observations. 1, I see that the government, through the hard work of the OSDBUs, has hit its small business goals for prime contracting in each of the past 4 years. That is a noteworthy achievement because these are seasoned, committed small business professionals, and they do their job well. The GAO reports that several agencies and their OSDBU programs are not in overall compliance with portions of the 15K requirements. This is a concern to me, particularly as a lawyer. I believe that full compliance with the law is essential. In my opinion, the SBPAC must work collaboratively together to balance both of these needs. The purpose of the GAO report in this hearing is to make the OSDBU program function even better, and SBA certainly shares that goal. Of the 20 recommendations made in the report, there's only one for SBA. The report recommends that we provide more detailed guidance in our SBPAC review process. Otherwise, the remaining recommendations involve other agencies. For SBA's part, we have already begun to implement changes in our review process through changing the scorecard weighted goals and percentages, as outlined in my written testimony. Also, we have implemented peer review changes and factoring in compliance requirements as part of our scorecard process. Those changes will be in place for the upcoming fiscal year 2017 evaluations. Aside from the scorecard and peer review, I also mentioned in my written testimony that I intend to use the SBPAC to increase collaboration between SBA and the OSDBU directors. I want us to share best practices and opportunities to increase access across agencies. The bottom line, excuse me, the bottom line is that I want us collectively to best serve our small business customers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for your continued interest in this program. I look forward to your questions, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Wong. And Mr. Boshears, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Knight, Ranking Member Murphy, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I welcome the opportunity to discuss with you today the Department of Homeland Security's DHS award-winning small business contracting program. Since its inception, DHS has always been committed to small business inclusion in its contracting program, and as the director of the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization, OSDBU, I work throughout the department to promote and develop strategies for small business participation in the DHS contracting program, and with other OSDBU directors, SBA, and the SBPAC to promote federal-wide small business participation. Some of the innovative and inclusive initiatives DHS uses includes maintaining a web presence with helpful and timely resources for small businesses, publishing an annual forecast of contracting opportunities, and setting and monitoring DHS-wide and component small business goals. As this committee knows very well, small businesses make substantial contributions to the American economy and taxpayers through innovation, job creation, cost savings, and tax revenue. For these reasons, the DHS OSDBU plays a key role in the department's efforts to promote meaningful communications with industry. DHS is proud of its successful small business contracting program, which has benefited from strong support from DHS senior leadership. For example, Acting Secretary Elaine Duke and Undersecretary for Management Claire Grady, the senior official performing the duties of the Deputy Secretary, are both longtime supporters of the federal small business contracting program throughout their distinguished careers. They continue to offer strong support to the DHS OSDBU in their current positions. DHS is also proud of its results from the SBA's annual Small Business Procurement Scorecard. DHS has received a grade of A or A+ each year between fiscal year 2009 and fiscal year 2016, making DHS the largest federal agency to have such a consistent success record. Finally, as evidence of the department's efforts to maintain a small business contracting program that promotes small business prime contracts and small business subcontracts under DHS large business prime contractors, DHS demonstrated compliance with all of the Section 15K requirements selected by GAO for the review during a recent audit that is the topic of this hearing. Chairman Knight, Ranking Member Murphy, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you again for the opportunity to testify today on this important topic. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Quick and to the point. We do have the chairman of the Small Business Committee here with us today, and we will ask him for all of the really smart questions to be coming out. I will start questions, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. So I'll ask just a kind of a general question across the board, and Mr. Shearer, we'll start with you. Some agencies have stated in response to the GAO's findings that certain functional requirements are unmet because those functions are performed by another office within the agency. In light of other competing priorities and limited budgets, should this be of concern, particularly of small agencies?
The answer to that is yes. I think that whenever any agency is not in compliance, cannot demonstrate compliance, it raises a concern because the requirements are there to serve a purpose. I was very glad to hear Rob Wong say that it's important that agencies be in compliance. One of the things that we did in our interactions with the agencies and that we raise as possibility in terms of asking for, let's say, exceptions or things of that nature, is that there can be circumstances in which it might make sense to create an exception or to create some flexibility around some requirements. But it is at the starting point and many times at our finishing point, there's the lack of compliance, of demonstrated compliance, is a concern for us.
And let me take that a little further, and Mr. Wong, maybe you can help me out with this. What happens with noncompliance? Then what's the mechanism now? If you're finding out there is noncompliance, what's the next step?
So I can really only speak to the way that I've been I've been handling this for the last couple of months. But when we find, the first thing I've done is try to educate myself about how many companies have been out of compliance, and then we seek to wonder why. But in general, if we find some, I will assure you, at least at this point, that from my dealings with the OSDBUs, they are committed small business professionals, and I don't think that anyone willfully wants to be or is trying to willfully flout the law. But when we do find someone that is out of compliance, I think that it's important that they become compliant. I do believe that if an exception is necessary, then we can obviously advocate for that. But in general, if we find that somebody is out of compliance, we will certainly try to. In my mind, I look at things that because all of the 15K requirements are complied with at some point by all of the agencies that we have. So they're very good. They're a good roadmap, and they certainly serve a purpose. So what we want to be able to do with the agencies that are out of compliance is to educate them by collaborating with them with best practices and trying to use the SBPAC to share information to help others that are out of compliance to get in compliance by following the example of other agencies that have been able to comply.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect answer. I really do. I think that so many small businesses that, whatever their dealings are with government, one of their issues and one of the things that they talk to us about is, government's not working with me, or they're not trying to help me and figure out why I'm not doing the right thing or why I missed something. I could talk from my home state in California. I dealt with an awful lot of agencies that were more on the heavy-handed instead of the education. And a small business is in business of making money so that they can produce jobs and they can produce opportunities. And so I think that part of our job, or at least the government's job, should be, let's help them get to a place where they will be in compliance and they will understand what we're trying to do and why this is so important. So I think that's a perfect answer. One last question, then I'll go to Ms. Murphy. Given that federal contracting has moved toward practices that may be unfriendly to small business, such as strategic sourcing and category management, How important do you think these Section 15K requirements are to address concerns regarding small businesses? And I'll go to Mr. Shears or Mr. Wong or whoever wants to jump on in on that.
Well, in my experience at DHS, and I believe this will relate to your question about strategic sourcing and I'm sorry.
Nope, you're good.
In regard to your question about strategic sourcing and category management, I'll reflect just briefly on my experience at DHS with regard to Section 15K. What I've observed is that being in compliance with Section 15K establishes the foundation and the framework to implement the small business contracting program. I found that to be very important in my work. And then in terms of strategic sourcing and category management, we have to use the current federal contracting system as our launch pad to understand how small businesses can participate in that environment. You know, and see, that's, for a small business advocate, the small business constituents that are interested in doing business with a federal agency like mine, DHS, or any federal agency, what they want to know about is how can they identify meaningful opportunities to participate. So if that comes in the form of strategic sourcing, they would want to learn about that, for example. If they are looking at the way an agency has bought something in the past, they want to consider that. So all of these types of things factor into their decision on how to participate. So with this new landscape, those types of things will still come into play.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to move on to Ms. Murphy, and I recognize her for 6 minutes and 32 seconds.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Shearer, the OSDBU reporting structure described in Section 15K 3 of the Small Business Act is in place to ensure that those charged with advocating for small businesses are in a position to influence contracting opportunities. In multiple GAO reports concerning OSDBUs, you've emphasized the correlation between an office's reporting structure and its ability to effectively advocate on behalf of small businesses. Can you elaborate on how an OSDBU's reporting structure can affect an agency's ability to achieve small business contracting goals?
Let me use one example comes to mind immediately, and it was something that Kevin Shearer was just talking about, strategic sourcing. So even though our report here isn't on strategic sourcing, certainly a lot of the apparatus around OSDBUs created by the Small Business Act is to give a certain stature to the OSDBU director to really affect, to really have resources in place to reach out to small businesses, to influence policy of the agency, whether it's talking about market research or whatever other mechanisms there are to make sure that there's appropriate opportunities for small businesses. So let me just refer back to, we did a report now 3 years ago on strategic sourcing and inclusion of small business. So from the moment, of going into DHS, I hope I don't embarrass you, Kevin, but I'll just say it was clear that there was certainly, he was at the table with the strategic sourcing working group in even making decisions of when strategic sourcing would be used. So that stature became even more important than what we talk about, just simple, single award contracts. It became very important that way. It became very important that they were using set-asides within strategic sourcing in a way that I thought was kind of like more pronounced than some of the other agencies use. So that gives me an example of where this structure can be very effective. So I think I'll end it there unless you want to ask a follow-up.
No, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Mr. Shearer, first, let me commend your office for being the highest complying OSDBU, and thank you for being here. Are there, from your perspective, having run a successful program, are there any statutory changes you would recommend to increase utilization of small business contracting programs?
Thank you for the question. In my work effort, I get a tremendous amount of feedback directly from small business owners and representatives themselves. So over the past year or two, when I'm having these discussions, and I have them like on a daily basis, it's one of the joys of my work. I listen for patterns. If companies are bringing up the same topic, to me repeatedly from different individual companies, it gets my attention. So I would say over the past year or so, maybe a 2-year period, what the small businesses that I've spoken with, they want to be able to continue to have meaningful opportunities to participate. Like, for example, suppose a small business has served as a prime contractor on a small business set-aside contract, and they've done a really, really good job. They want to be able to at least make an effort to keep doing that contract, like if there's a recompetition later for the same work. Well, in areas like strategic sourcing or category management or government-wide contracts, if the agency is changing contracts, moving from one method to another, and that small business is not on the second contract of choice, then the company doesn't have an opportunity to in their words, rebid their work. So these are the types of things that have come on my radar screen, in the past couple of years, because I've heard that from hundreds of companies, in my daily and weekly phone calls and email exchanges. So, as Mr. Shearer mentioned on one of GAO's review from several years ago on strategic sourcing, see, when these discussions are taking place, it's very important for the OSDBU director, to use Mr. Shearer's words, have a seat at the table. Because, see, that's the only way, in my experience, one can be an effective advocate. You see, I hold the small business community in such high regard that at DHS, for over 14 years now, the small business community, they've done a magnificent job for us in support of our mission. And they're very, very good at what they do in a wide variety of industries. So I want to be able to continue to offer these meaningful opportunities to participate. Experienced small business owners will tell you they understand that there are different contract vehicles and different ways of buying for the federal government, and they will tell you, and they try to keep abreast of it. But it's very important to keep that meaningful opportunity to participate, because that's where they flourish. And that's where all the good things happen as a result of securing those contracts.
Great, thank you very much, and I'll yield back.
Okay, and we will go to Mr. Coomer for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wong, first question. Once the SBPAC finds that a statutory requirement is not met by OSDBU, what happens next? Does the SBA conduct any oversight or investigation into identified instances of noncompliance?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. As I said before, I can only tell you what I can do over the last couple of months since I've been there, but compliance with the law is critical to me. I think that I agree with Kevin, Mr. Shearer, that it provides a framework upon which we can analyze the small business community, and that's the way that we can help them the best. But when we find somebody that's out of compliance, the first question I want to know is why. And what I've found is that, in general, if somebody is out of compliance and wants to be in compliance or needs to be in compliance, then we have to be collaborative. We're not we're not in a supervisory position, and we don't want to be, I don't think. But we have to work collaboratively as a community to work together to bring them in compliance. One of the things I had mentioned before is I'd like to team them with other agencies that are in compliance with those goals so that they can share best practices and simply just strategies on how to become compliant and still be effective.
Okay. In the memo, it says, across the board, agencies cited inadequate staffing levels, organizational structural barriers, and limited budgets as reasons for noncompliance. Could anyone on the panel answer this? If anyone would like to elaborate on any of those particular issues and what stands out the most, would anyone like to comment on that?
Hearing silence, I'll be brave and try to
There you-
answer
there you
that
go.
question. So, no, I appreciate the question. It's a very good question, where I think that for some agencies that have lower levels of contracting activity, some of the granularity in the requirements might be something that, like, this committee might want to consider in its interactions. But for the most part, I come back to what has already been stated. There's a severe concern as a starting point, and many times as an ending point. There's a severe concern when an agency is not in compliance, especially, I'd say, to kind of some of the larger issues, whether it's dealing with bundling, whether it's the level of seniority of the individual, the reporting relationship. Those are very important factors there. And even though we had agencies that came forward and said, this requirement, let's just say on collateral duties, doesn't make sense for us. And, we can be sympathetic to a point with that and really consider what they're saying. Be glad to answer questions about that. There is a real concern when it's really like, to use an expression that Kevin just used, having a place at the table of really being an advocate. It is a concern. And some of these are, and when we asked at every interview we had with agencies, so across the 24 agencies, we asked the question, are there any of these provisions in the Small Business Act that we're examining that you think are less important than some of the others that maybe should be considered to, for statutory changes? We got silence. So the only time that where we got, really saying something had to be done, it was very specific to that agency. And so there was a lack of the agencies coming forward and just saying, this is what we think should be done, at least for the smaller contracting shops.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Shearer, just real quickly, or Mr. Evans, when the GAO does its audit report and it comes out, how much of the findings can you then go back to the agencies and say, these are the corrections that we think are the best corrections or the best steps you can take? Or is it up to the agencies to figure out, what steps you need to take to correct this?
It's a great question.
I'm
And
good at it.
Okay, thanks. It is a great question. I'll answer it in a general way first. Whenever we make recommendations, agencies aren't required to implement our recommendations, but they tend to have a pretty high rate of addressing our recommendations. So in this case, we have one case where we haven't been successful. I mean, our last OSDBU report was now 6 years ago, but is that coming into compliance? And we've always had this statement in there that come into compliance or explain to Congress why not. So it is, so the general answer is we're always willing to work with agencies, and we don't want to make recommendations that micromanages them, that says, you shall do this, you should put this person in place, or you should institute this specific procedure. but we try to make them general enough that they can incorporate our recommendations within the context of how they run their agencies. So when we're asked, and I know there's a lot of interaction between SBA and us on open recommendations, that when they ask us, we'll say, these are the types of things that that we're looking for. We tend to look for kind of general, in the spirit of recommendations of taking actions to address deficiencies that we've identified in our reports. So I know this is a very high-level answer, but that's generally how things work with agencies, whether it's in this arena or with other types of recommendations.
Okay, very good. Mr. Evans, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is to the panel. How are each of you and your entities engaged with efforts to support supply diversity and diversity among your outreach within the contracting programs?
I kind of feel like it's a question that's more about what OSDBUs and the agencies do in their small business
Correct.
programs. I'll just state that we, on the behalf of this committee, I know I've testified on HubZone and on different programs that are meant to reach out to different socioeconomic categories. We've certainly done work on the 8A business development program and those various programs. So we evaluate. So I always say we evaluate. We don't actually go out and administer anything. But we have had a focus over the years as far as our body of work on how well those programs work.
And good.
Thank you for the question. I would say from SBA's point of view, we do focus on the how. And, my job that I look at very simply is we want people to have make it easier for the public and the companies who want our certifications, make it easier for them to get them. But I think that we also have a responsibility to help them to make more money by using them. So I take a look at the socioeconomic categories every day. And I have a lot of familiarity over the last 25, 30 years with those programs. So I'm constantly thinking of additional things, either through process, through policy, or through advocacy, to make more opportunities and effectively to increase the supply of contracts that can be executed by these small businesses. I can certainly talk to you at another time about the specific things that I have in mind. It's up to you. Thank you.
At DHS, for the past 14 years, we have a history of supporting all of the small and socioeconomic programs available to the federal government. And we found that, to use the private sector phrase, supplier diversity, that's been a tremendous strength to us. By actively engaging with the small business community as part of our overall effort on industry engagement and participating in a number of outreach activities all around the country, including some we host ourselves, we found that by helping to identify these meaningful opportunities, supporting the various small business set-aside programs, we have a very diverse pool of within our small business contractor base that has stepped forward, took a very sincere effort to understand the DHS mission, and then through their contract work, in effect, support the mission. So it's been a tremendous benefit to us, and we certainly plan to continue that effort.
Let me just follow a little bit then. What areas that you feel can be strengthened?
Within our program?
Yes.
Well, we always want to look for improvement. What I would like to see within the DHS framework is really a continuation of things that we started years ago, but that we're putting more emphasis on now. Like, for example, industry engagement and communication with industry is important for all size businesses who want to operate in federal contracting. But it's especially important for the small business community because again, you know, I talk to so many companies, they share their thoughts with me, so they're always with me. You know, they don't have big marketing budgets. You know, they have scarce resources, so they have to find ways to be, you know, effective in those efforts. So one of the things that they've told me is that by targeting 3 to 5 federal agencies as potential customers, they can focus, you know, their efforts, and with the consideration of various teaming arrangements that are very common in federal space, small businesses can actively engage with target agencies, including DHS as an illustration, and then on the federal and DHS side of the fence, if we can continue to identify these meaningful opportunities that I mentioned briefly a few minutes ago, we can continue to do this. And it's a benefit to DHS because these firms help us meet the mission.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're back, bounce.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Well, it's been a fruitful meeting. I appreciate all the members. I think Ms. Murphy and I have worked kind of in a teamwork to try and understand some of these issues and try and correct some of these problems. Some of these are very difficult, and they're difficult to understand. You throw out 1,000 acronyms at us. It's like being on armed services and trying to understand everything that's going on. But the crux of it is understanding what small business is going through and how small business can kind of work through a problem, work through an issue. And I love what Mr. Wong said. Be educated on something and try not to make the same mistake and be able to comply in the future. So it is very important that we talk about this and that maybe we make some changes to this. So today's hearing is a perfect example of the critical oversight function of this subcommittee on contracting and workforce. It is the responsibility of the OSDBUs to advocate for small contractors, and it is Congress's duty to ensure that these statutory responsibilities are being met. GAO's work with this report and the valuable testimony from all our witnesses allows us to identify where the gaps are and pinpoint weaknesses where legislative action or continued oversight may be necessary. What we've learned today will be critical in promoting small business success in the federal contracting space. I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. This hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry for being a
No,
few
no,
minutes
no.
late.